My name's Arn Menconi, and we're somewhere 4 hours south of Standing Rock.
And what do you do when you're not involved with political stuff?
I'm an activist. I'm a social justice activist. I ran a nonprofit for disadvantaged youth for 21 years that I started outside of the sport. It grew out of snowboarding, and it became a value-based leadership justice organization. I also was a 2-term Eagle County commissioner.
So
And I'm a dad of Maya and Mateo, who's 10 and 12 years old.
And what do you do? What else do you do on the side of the political spectrum? Because I know you're doing more.
Well, I interviewed Daniel Ellsberg a year ago, and we came out with an oral history of why America goes to war. It's called Lied to Death. And I started doing interviews of people from whistleblowers to political theorists. I specialized in foreign affairs and the defense budget. So I tried to tell people about that story.
And where did your push to make that particular story, like why did you want that story told right now?
About 2 years ago, I was let go of the charity that I started because I was telling a story about what the United States government was doing in going back to war with ISIS. And I was also starting to write about and talk about on Facebook the 51-day war between Israel and Palestine. And people started calling our largest funder, Vail Resorts, and Vail Resorts called my board of directors and said either he goes or we go. So within a week, I was out of a career of running a national charity that I had started.
For just posting about the Israel.
And when you're over 55 years of age and you've been in politics and you were being political, it's hard to find work in your field. So what I did is, SOS was an outgrowth of a calling, help inner city kids during 1993 when there was gangbanging in LA, Denver, all across the country. Now there's another calling. It's about the war that nobody's talking about. Or another way of putting it, as Nick Turse talks about, we're in a secret war in 134 countries. This is an empire in decline. And being an anti-war activist, it's sort of like there isn't an anti-war movement in America. There's an environmental movement, there's a Black Lives Matter movement, there's a movement about the Palestinians, but not one about what is killing millions of people. There's 60 million people in refugee camps around the world, and that's been my mantra for the past 2 years, is to get people to realize that this large growth of refugee is because of what America has been doing as an empire with their military intervention throughout the world.
One of the things we've seen across this week, we've talked to a lot of delegates from the convention, and a lot of them have actually gone green for support of Jill Stein. They have talked about their no more war chants being seen as a protest, and that seems like a major shift in American policy when you're looking at Democratic Party had been previously the anti-war party, and so what's the thoughts on that movement in general? How we get that breathe life back into that idea and allow it to take.
Well, first I'd have to start by the Democratic Party has facilitated the wars since after World War II. Truman, LBJ, the Vietnam War was John Kennedy encroaching into South Vietnam with 6,000 special forces that led to what Johnson did. It's about the I don't want to use the word oligarchy here. I'm going to use the word the corporate totalitarian groups that run our government, that see a weapons-based economy and having 800 bases around the world and facilitating the flow of commerce. In many cases it's been oil, but it was in Central America, was for the Banana Republic. So wherever our business interests are, we're all pretty familiar with the conventions of a economic hitman. What we do is we go in and we destroy countries, and then we go back in and create loans and debts for those countries, and that's been an endless cycle. When the Soviet Empire fell in the 80s, The United States was the only superpower in theory. And what did it do? It went into Panama. It was like its test run. So this military intervention of destruction, of killing, of murdering, of illegal wars is part of our foreign policy. We have to get this straight. This is a story that nobody really seems to understand until it's put out there. It's very simple facts.
You know, actually, I'm really thinking about what you said about the, I mean, I'm hearing that, of course, but I'm thinking about what you said about the no anti-war movement in America right now. We just went around and interviewed all the delegates that came together, or tons and tons of activists, and I've been really thinking about it, and I can't really think of anyone that had a focus that ending war was the drive of their activism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it feels like it has become an accepted attitude towards America
Right.
and how we handle business. And so, I'm not even sure how we attack an issue like that to make change in that field.
Well, let me put it in a cynical way. The only thing America has ever invented is PR. So Bush, everyone like me was against the Iraq war. We got Obama elected because he was going to end the wars. He has facilitated endless wars. He's perfected drone attacks, and he's arrested more whistleblowers than any president in the history of the United States. But he has perfected a way, and the government and the corporate totalitarian state, of bringing in drones instead of pilots, bringing in contracted soldiers instead of soldiers. So when they stopped the draft in the 60s and 70s, they figured out ways for us to continue going to war. And when you start to look at where the money flow is, and I'd like to think that that's where I specialize, the money flow is in the weapons sales. So Obama has sold almost $1 trillion worth of weapons in the 8 years that he's been president. He's sold weapons to our enemies. He has gone ahead and approved the rebuilding of our nuclear arsenal over the next 30 years, which is another $1 trillion. And every year there's $1 trillion. So when people aren't reporting on this, because 80% of what we hear and read is by the same corporations that are funding our senators, our president, and our Congress people, no wonder we're not hearing about the story. We're not being taught it in colleges because colleges are being funded many times by many of the same CEOs. So when you have this silence, it takes alternative media. It takes, look, here's another interesting point. 70% of the professors in our nation are non-tenured professors. So in order to have another Noam Chomsky tenured who could speak on the level that he's speaking, you're not going to go ahead and see that because they don't want people to tenure. Look at who's running the Atlantic Monthly right now, a man named Jeffrey Goldberg. Jeffrey Goldberg was a guard in Israeli prisons. Now he's running the Atlantic Monthly, and this week they published the story, "Why is Hillary Clinton so popular?" This is supposed to be an intellectual journal. The man who's running the editorial board for the New York Times is James Bennett, Michael Bennett's brother. I'm running against U.S. Senator Michael Bennett. His mother was a Holocaust survivor. So we're not hearing a fair and balanced story from what's called the liberal media.
So, is there really anything else we can do besides, because this seems like this is the problem beneath all the problems at the core of it, like these weapon sales are allowed to happen. The only way to upset that is by voting, and then they control the voting process, so you can't do that. So is there anything we can do besides just a complete overhaul?
Yeah, we have to be citizens. Look, this was taught to us by Plato and Aristotle. Yeah, the republic form of government that was set up, and happiness was found by educating yourself, by asking questions. The same thing that Socrates was put on trial for was asking questions and teaching people to ask questions. When you start to use your Socratic method and you start to research, and we have the democratization of the internet so that we could get access to almost any information, so we could hear from batshit crazy to factual, and then hopefully develop a way of dissolving the information and putting it out there. That's being a citizen. You cannot have a democracy without having it as a duty to you. They didn't set it up so that we just wake up and vote every 4 years when we've had a 2-year campaign cycle of nothing but a horse race and polls, right? Have we heard? I think the media analyst said we've only had 32 minutes of policy discussion in a presidential race. 32 minutes on mainstream media. I think I spend 32 minutes in a morning reading policy off of Twitter. So if people could go to alternative ways of finding the information, and then you look at Standing Rock. This is, I think, Obama's Katrina. He is allowing a war against the environment, against the Native American people. He's given $10 million for militarization of a police force from 7 states. 400 people have been arrested. That is a case study on what's going on all the time. If it's Black Lives Matter, how does a black president not have the courage to go after policemen who are caught on camera killing black men? Or Loretta Lynch, a black attorney general, or Eric Holder. So why should a white middle-aged guy with gray hair be the one who's telling the story? Because I was on the inside. I campaigned for these guys. I was a Democrat. I went to the Bill Clinton dinner. I went to the Nancy Pelosi fundraiser. I've watched all this. I drank the Kool-Aid, and then I said, it's a bunch of bullshit. It's a bunch of lies.
So,
yeah, this is another form of activism. This is a hybrid. This is the sort of mashing together of what we see done in music, where you take all the different musics and you put it together. I'm putting together activist journalism. I'm putting together activism. I'm putting together running for office. And I'm using the new media, social media, to tell the story and build a movement around something called truth and justice.
I've heard of those things. They used to be around a lot more.
Yeah.
It's like the friends that used to hang out that don't call you.
You know,
Like, come on,
here's
buddy.
what I taught kids for 20 years. In your lifetime, the injustice that you will see doesn't exist now. So when I flash back to when I was a kid, the injustice was racism. It was the Vietnam War. Very easy for me to detect as a 6th, 7th, and 8th grader. It took a long time for me to see the nebulousness of the type of injustice that's going on now. You know, you take the red pill or the blue pill. I busted, snorted, and shot the red pill. And it's up to everyone in order to try to figure out if they want to be part of the matrix or if they want to get outside of the matrix. And what I urge people to do is to make it part of their everyday life. And you don't have to look at it like, how do I do it? Who do I try? You know, you're going to make so many mistakes, but you'll succeed over the arc of your life. All I tell people is work backwards from wanting to save one life in the Middle East, because we've decimated the Middle East over the last 35 years.
Yeah, it's the drone war is actually one of the biggest things that I'm against on a whole. Once you get behind, stop fracking, because the drone war is absolutely shocking, and there's nothing about it. And no one really knows how bad it is.
Yes.
Because our soldiers aren't in harm's way, and they
and my children, when they are my age, in their late 50s, and if they have children, they're going to look at sea levels at 20 and 30 feet. They're going to look at refugees having to flee Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, all the shorelines. And where are they going to go? Maybe they'll go to Colorado, where I live, where it's higher ground, where there's not enough water, and people will really be shooting each other over water.
So you got 5 more days in the election. Last question. Looks like we have to go.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
I think you wake up every day when you have a calling, and for me, I listen to my spiritual heart of love and compassion, and I guide myself off of that. As a man who is an older father, I have to be a father first. I've tried to model for my children how I wish for them to be as they get older. And I hope that's an example of how I could lead my life. And hopefully I'll win the election. I mean, look at what's happening every single day with the news. It's been historic. If that doesn't happen, I'll be part of, I've always worked in a charity, I've always worked in a movement, I've always worked for a cause. And I haven't asked what's next. I've asked what can I do next.
Thank you.
Thank you.